Okay, so for Matt Mitchell, observation video of the master schedule. So this is my mentor and administrator. This is Jen Biro, the principal of Miller Elementary School. So just to get started, how many years have you been with Miller and then with the district?
Been in Plano ISD for 20 years now. I have been a teacher for 4, so that gives me about 16 years in administration. So I've had 13 here at Miller as the principal and 3 years as an assistant principal within Plano.
And at the 2 different campuses, have you seen, were they very similar campuses, or did you have one that was very high population and low population?
Okay, so to kind of show my experience and what kind of groups of kids I've had. I've AP'd at 2 campuses, and one was a very affluent area. Kids were very comfortable, came to school taken care of. A big campus though, we're looking at 700, 750 kids. The second group that I AP'd was another campus, which is actually a campus here in Plano that houses the deaf education program for the entire county. So we had kids that were centralized and brought to us in the deaf ed program, so they had a very hefty special ed population, and their low SES at that point was probably close to 30–40%. So don't think we were quite Title I, but on that cusp at that point. But when I was assistant principal, and then came to Miller as assistant principal for half a year and have been here ever since.
And so in creating a master schedule, have you, obviously you had experience as an AP and maybe as a teacher as well. How many years have you been involved in creating a master schedule?
Okay. I would say a lot of campuses I was on, we had minimal input in the master schedule, because as a teacher, you give more feedback just regarding the lunch schedule or the special schedule. It's kind of the only part that I played as a teacher. When I moved to assistant principal, it was similar to now. Campuses varied somewhat in regards to how much control the teachers had. I think when I looked at the campus with the deaf ed program and a high special ed program as well as a bilingual program, that schedule was very difficult to plan. So that did not fall much on the teachers, it was more the admin team. At Miller, we do a little bit of approach of leadership team, some with the teachers and some with just admin, so we do a mix.
Okay, and so at this point, if you could, in as much detail as you can think of, and then we can go into questions later, just sort of describe your step-by-step process of creating a master schedule, and maybe some of the changes that throughout your career, maybe at the beginning you had a certain way of doing it, and then you've sort of grown throughout your career.
Okay. I would say from a few years back to now, the main thing that has changed is, it sounds wrong, but it's actually the best way to do it. We've decreased teacher control, and that is to ensure special populations are getting what they need, that we are utilizing the staff the best way we can by doing cross-grade level or multi-grade level, and also just meeting the needs of varying levels. So we've kind of decreased teacher ability to have input. It starts way back, the actual process starts way back in around March, usually. We bring team leaders in, and as the leadership team, we work on the master schedule only from the perspective of when they went lunch and when they went recess. So it does not change every year. There are times we sit down as the leadership team and everyone just nods their head and says they're happy. We want it to stay the way it is. And we're great. We keep lunch, recess, and specials all the same. And there's other years where it might just be a flip-flop where one group says, okay, we've had first for a couple of years now, we want to break and we'll move some things around. I have, over the years, had one standing point that I would not back down from, and that was the point that kindergarten will always be the last specials. The idea behind that is, if you think of your little 4, even 4 at the beginning of school, and 5-year-olds, the time it takes them to get down the hallway and then all the way back to class, you can lose a good 10 minutes with them. Over the course of a week, you've lost almost an hour of time of them traveling through the hallways. So that's why I move them to the end of the day. They finish their day, they dismiss from the gym. So it decreases the amount of time they're in the hallway, and it increases instructional minutes. So that's kind of my one non-negotiable when it comes to teachers' control with specials, lunch, and recess. Beyond that, we talk about it. Mr. Mitchell and I had spoken earlier about, is there a reason that youngers go first or the older kids? We really don't have a reason. It's just more of how it fits. looking at the chunks in the day, what makes them comfortable. The kindergartners or the kindergarten teachers have truly enjoyed that first break at 10:45 for their lunch, because they look at a solid morning of all instruction when they're awake and they're fresh and they're not tired and they're not ornery. So they have a good chunk of morning, they go for morning recess, they come back in and finish it. And then between lunch, recess, specials, another afternoon recess, and some maybe science or social studies, the bulk of their instruction is done in the morning. So that's part of why we have continued with kinder and first having lunch as the first block. We're also fortunate to be a smaller school, so we are able to just do 3 lunch blocks, which does give you a little more flexibility to move groups around. You're not blocked into 6 sections. We only have 3 sections that we have to accommodate, so we just do the 3 sections. When we work on specials, lunch, and the recess schedule, lunch is also taken to the cafeteria staff. So we also get their perspective before we say everything is solid, because we want to make sure they're able to accommodate the speed at which students will be coming in. If you think of the time it takes a kindergartner or first grader to go through the line, pick their food, type their code, sit down, and even the long time it takes at the beginning of the year for 5-year-olds to clean up and get in line, you have to look at the schedule in that regard. So we also talk with the cafeteria staff before we solidify lunch and specials. So that's the first step that goes on back in March. We move a little bit later in the year. Teachers start working on class list. So they go in with the intent that they need to create 3 or 4, depending on how many teachers are at that grade level, 3 or 4 class lists that are balanced classrooms. So I want them just 3 sections that all seem pretty similar. There are some special considerations, so I've even printed some of the parent letters that we get each year. So teachers have to think about this when they're creating class lists. And the reason I talk about class lists is the placement of kids is going to impact your pull-out program, which is going to impact your master schedule. So with all of these teacher requests from parents, we typically accommodate. Not always. We do our best. I look at it from the perspective of, if I don't kind of listen or do something similar to what they're requesting, they're just going to walk in my office, fill out paperwork, and ask for a change of class. So I might as well do everything I can to get something to their liking on the front end versus battle with them later.
And how many of those with the parent requests, because I know on our campus we have several grade levels that are departmentalized, so they're going to see each teacher anyway. So in your respect, with what you just said, it doesn't seem like there's a big difference, so just giving them that, just sort of like making that a concession sort of seems like
we're giving something to them.
right, but it's virtually, you're not really giving them that
Yeah.
that win there, if you want to call it that. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Right, so in 4th and 5th, it is pretty much departmentalized, but they're going to have a group of teachers anyway. But sometimes we do make an effort to, if schedules allow, we do make an effort to place a child in that home room. But in essence, they're going to see the teachers in 4th and 5th pretty much the same amount of time. So between the teacher request letters that the parents had given us, we have to think about those. Then I also have notes, and this is the sheet we keep, and I usually keep 2 years at a time. I keep the current year notes, and down lower I keep the last year's notes. And these are comments from the staff. We've learned that these 2 kids don't work together, or a parent said they don't want this child with, or there's just a variety of reasons that we have kids on this sheet. So this also has to be taken into consideration. So when the teachers sit down and do a class list, it's a lengthy process. They are also given information from the instructional specialist, the ESL teacher, the GT teacher, because all of those kids need to be possibly clustered in certain groups. So when you create a class, you might be told that I need all of my ESL, or I need the top ESL kids in this one. In this group, we're going to need, or this class, I'm going to need all my dyslexic kids. So all of those pieces come into play. So sometimes when the teachers create their class list, they eventually kind of have their hands tied when it's all said and done, because of all the special populations that we have to think about and the parent letters. So they are masters at rearranging, changing, and getting those class lists where they need to be. Okay, now this brings us back to the schedule. Once the class lists come to us in May, that's when the instructional specialist, the ESL teacher, your GT teacher, special ed teacher, we all sit down, as well as the counselor, assistant principal. We're all together looking at the class list, because we have to ensure the class list can fit into the master schedule. So those children, if we have to move or change them, we make adjustments. so that we can decide, you know, we need reading groups in the morning, I need dyslexic in the afternoon, ESL fourth grade needs this time. So grade levels have not solidified their schedules yet. They've made class lists, they're starting to think about what they want as far as reading in the morning, math in the afternoon, whatever the case may be, but nothing is solid until after we all meet and look at class list. That's when the teachers in the instructional realm, those pull-out programs, look to ensure that every little duck is where it needs to be. We know when subjects have to occur, and we go back to the teachers with some minor adjustments. So after some of those conversations, then the teachers eventually send, and I have all their schedules, kinder, first, second, all of them. They eventually send what they want their schedule to be. So as we're sitting down, we're talking, we're looking at this, making sure it's gonna fit, and then the master schedule's kind of put together in that regard. So a lot of pieces in the puzzle.
Okay, and so at this point, we're going to sort of move into just sort of a question and answer pertaining to the master schedule and just how decisions are made. And Jen did a really good job of going into detail about some of those. So we'll skip through and just sort of hop from back and forth here. So obviously, our number one goal is to put the students in the best situation for learning. And with all of our special pull-out programs, you know, it's sort of, you have different pulls, you have different strings pulling you in all different situations. So not that one thing is more important than the other, as far as a pull-out program or something like that, but how do you personally, in your experience, how have you decided how to make those decisions?
It's worked out well that the group of ladies down in the enrichment hall get along very well. I have experienced in the past where you're going to have a very disjointed group of people that don't always want to work together. So having them on the same page, what's best for kids, maximizing minutes, they're able to work together. And if you don't have that, it makes it more difficult. Because we do have it set up where I've got dyslexics for the same grade, 2 groups, 2 teachers going at the same time, pulling kids and bringing them out. You could have a situation where teachers don't get along, it's just a lot of friction on the team, and you could have kids being pulled at different times, which is hard for teachers. So we've got dyslexic going and pulling at the same time. ESL is also trying to pull at the same time. So they come down your hall, they pull a lot of kids at the same time and take them away, which decreases interruptions for the classroom teacher.
Right, and so they're getting their minutes, but it's not just grabbing them at random times where it might actually disrupt the entire flow of the grade level.
I would say we're probably, and tell me your perspective as a teacher, I would think, or I have the perception that we've done better with our dyslexia reading groups and ESL being pulled at a better time than SPED. It seems like SPED is more of, we just have to patchwork it in based on.
That was what I was going to ask about, because with our pullouts as far as Take Flight for reading and some of our other groups, this campus more than any, it seems as though we target that specific subject to pull from. We're conscious of that specific student's maybe challenges, and so we don't want to pull them out of that specific subject area. Now with SPED, I know that we were talking about that we're going to have 7 SPED students coming into my grade level next year, all on different, that are receiving different accommodations. How specifically do you blend SPED into that master schedule or into that group with the other pull-out programs?
SPED is it's always, I think every year, it's a staffing issue, but that's right in regards to, or you're right, in regards to the Take Flight program. Being that 45-minute chunk and they're pulled out, we've worked really hard to make sure it's not during writing, it's not during maybe some of the spelling practice, that it is truly during the reading time so they don't miss anything else. ESL is also really good about trying to pull them out during maybe a literacy station time so they can come out and work there. When they go back to class, we just ignore one of their activities. SPED is very different. A part of it is some of those kids have pull-outs, so they're removed because they're 2 grade levels behind. Some have push-in. And when I look at, we have 6 grade levels, and we have about 6 staff members, it does, from a, you know, it's just a personnel kind of perspective, it does limit our ability to get in at the exact perfect time. So our hope is to get people in the classrooms at a decent time. Part of it falls on teachers being able to be flexible, to adjust how they do things. And sometimes that's hard.
And that was something that I had down here, as far as staffing affecting how you have to schedule. How exactly is our staffing for, so I know that we have a specific cap as far as our classrooms. So can you go into detail a little bit about how that is related to maybe the staffing that we get that sort of gives us
Sure.
those limitations?
Okay, I'll talk about all right, the way we get staffing for classrooms, obviously kinder through fourth, it's that 22. Realize that Plano is a district of innovation now, so we have a waiver. So we are probably one of those campuses that the district would allow us to float higher and would put a waiver in. So we do have some ability to do things because we're innovative.
And meaning innovative, that would allow us to have larger
Bigger.
classrooms?
Mhm.
Okay, and what is the purpose behind that? Or I guess the reasoning?
District probably looks at it from the needs across the district, because there's only so much money in the pot, so you want to disperse it appropriately. So if you look at a Title I campus with 80–90% low SES, those kids and their needs probably are not going to be they're not going to make as many gains in a 24-to-1 environment. And you come over to our campus and you look at, we're 17% low SES, we're not Title I, we don't have a bilingual program. Our children probably could be more successful with a little bit
And you're
higher.
assuming that our children would probably have more resources outside of the classroom, outside of the
Yeah.
school building as
Could
well.
be parental involvement, it could be other
Right.
resources. So we're a district of innovation, so
Okay.
the K through 4 could float up a little. Fifth grade, there's no state cap, so as you've seen this year, what, 26 you sat at?
Mhm.
They say 27-ish, so that's where fifth grade sits. That's called Gen Ed, okay? Gen Ed is where we get the quota for ESL, for GT, and our instructional specialist, okay? So minimum, every campus gets one GT teacher, one ESL teacher, and one instructional specialist.
Okay.
We're big enough, every campus is big enough, we get those 3 teachers automatically. We have a half-time dyslexic teacher. That is based on the number of dyslexic kids we have.
Okay,
So that's how we get those.
specific to our population?
Yep.
Okay.
And you go into SPED, that is specific to the number of kids we have. They look at the number of teachers you have and what their caseload is. So they want to know how many kids they're specifically in charge of. Because you have to look at parent meetings, prepping off grade level materials as well as push-in materials, documentation, data, all that has to happen. So they look at each teacher having a certain number,
Mhm.
and that's how they decide.
And that would be
Um,
classroom teacher or
The SPED
specialist
teacher.
Okay, SPED.
So we look at just our SPED population, there's 35 kids that are under SPED that get pull out or in-class support.
Mhm.
So they look at the severity, because they're coded, and they look at giving each teacher somewhere around 10 kids, and therefore we have 3 teachers.
And so, and this may be, an obvious question, but as far as how they're coded, would that have an effect on how many students a teacher would be responsible for?
Yes, for example, we have a centralized unit, we have a structured classroom, and then we have regular SPED kids. So when you have a centralized unit, those friends are very high needs. So we're staffed differently based on the needs in that unit. When you look at the structured classroom, those kids are our Miller kids, but they are high needs. Limited verbal, very low cognitive, needing a lot of change and just resources during the day, so they're staffed higher. And then when you get into the general population, those kids are coded like a 40, 41, maybe some 42s, if you will. Those kids can have more, a teacher can carry more on their caseload of those kids.
And so if we go back to the scheduling portion, when you have the children that are a little bit more that are highly coded, that are more pullouts, but you're having to find those times to get them into the classroom, does that have more of a, more weight when it comes to that schedule, because there are limited times when those specific children can get in there?
We work, and that goes back to when we all sit down in the conference room, we work to do as many cross-grade level groupings as we
Okay.
can. So it's beneficial that 4th and 5th actually departmentalize, because that gives us 2 or 3 options in the day to try to line up our friends. 4th and 5th both need reading at this point, so if you're rotating, I need this one in group B and this one in group A, because they'll both be in language arts at the same time.
When thinking about those two schedules, they're pretty similar as
Mhm.
far as times. There may be the specials pulling out a little bit earlier in one or the other, but they seem very similar to where they could be able to pull out, and at least in that third rotation.
And I can say the fifth grade schedule, working on the fifth grade schedule, we probably spent 40 minutes on that class list alone to ensure, because of the rotations, that every kid was in the right spot for all the pull-out programs. It was
Right.
just that grade level alone. It was like 40 minutes.
And just talking about that, when you do have that meeting as far as getting them to match up, what is the average amount of time that you would spend on a grade level, or does it change just so drastically from year to year?
It does change year to year, but I have to say in general, the upper grades take longer because of the departmentalizing.
Okay.
So in general, we don't do kinder, they're
Okay,
new.
Gotcha.
So when you're looking at first and second, they all do the same thing at the same time.
Mhm.
They're much more flexible with pull-outs coming in and out.
Because
So
they're
they're-
self-contained.
Mhm.
Okay.
It's when you start getting into, and even third's a little bit easier. Fourth and fifth are usually a little bit more, because you've got that going on.
I'm just thinking about fourth grade next year, where we have but we have 4 classes basically within the day, so that could be challenging. I know that in the last few years, especially, and not that it hasn't been a presence here and at some of my other campuses, but with social emotional, there's really a push. Are there times when, in our schedule, I know that we have, each week we have a time for our time so that we can work on social emotional activities. I don't know what other campuses do, but are there times when you have to weigh that instructional growth against social emotional and try to put something into the schedule for that specific reason?
Okay, true, good question. And that's that, I think that might be that battle between research and administration and teachers.
Mhm.
Because teachers feel that pressure of curriculum, what we have to get through, what we need to do. And then I have the leisure of seeing research and going to see the school done in Dallas. I mean, I've got those in the back of my head that I've seen that it can work. So there is that balance that if you don't take the time to ask them how their day was, how are you feeling, acknowledge that they're not the best that day, be able to let some things go on a bad day, then you're never gonna have that true relationship where they're gonna wanna perform for you. They gotta be comfortable, happy, confident little kids. And if it's a bad day, it's a bad day. You gotta be able to let things go and catch back up another day. So it's important, but that is the eternal battle.
Well, no, and as a teacher, sometimes you do feel that pressure.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I think that if you look out and you look for successful teachers or successful leaders, they're people that have the trust of the people that they're working with, and the people that are doing these things for them, quote unquote. In our reading, we talk about interpersonal relationships and how that's one of the biggest pros for leaders. And so it is a difficult thing, I understand what you're saying, but one is so necessary for the other one to work. So, if you're all X's and O's and you're all just the business, it's hard, especially for, our younger kids, kindergarten, first, second grade, even up through fifth grade. Like, there are things that children especially will do for you if they feel that you're invested as well.
I can think of a hallway where you've got like super strong teacher, another strong teacher, and one that the classroom's always a little loose. There's always a little bit more noise. But what's going on in there and the interactions between the teacher and the kids and the relationship between the kids, it may not be every second is utilized to the maximum, but when it's all looked at and data is on the table, there's not a difference in performance. So that's more proof that relationship and what you do with those kids is going to give you bang for your buck.
Well, and then if you look at it at that slightly, I guess, higher volume classroom, usually what you see is not children off task,
Not always.
messing around. They may be enjoying themselves, but usually it's towards a common goal.
Yep.
And so sometimes, teachers want that to develop that relationship. And so it's good that you see that. You mentioned earlier that we do have a smaller campus, we have a smaller number of certain students, but I saw in our statistics that we have a very high number of children with autism on our campus. compared to the district, we have a slightly higher number of sped students, just percentage-wise. Does that create difficulties because some of our populations, our smaller subgroups, are a little bit higher than other schools? Or is that something that you're just used to?
Well, I think it goes back, they look at staffing. So
Okay.
if we have more autistic, then they're coded differently. But some are high functioning, they're more Asperger's run, so they're in the classroom and only need like social skills, and some might need pull out. Part of our increase has to do with, in our centralized unit, there's about 2 or 3 of them that are coded. So they're not actually in our boundary,
Okay.
they're sent to us, which is gonna increase our numbers, percentage-wise, because we're small and
Now, talking about small, does having a smaller campus always mean things are easier? And I say that knowing the answer is no.
But
or
in some
assuming
ways-
the answer is no.
but in some ways, I can say
But
yes.
people would maybe assume that because it is a smaller campus, there are less
Yeah.
issues as far as the schedule.
We still have the same issues that everybody else has when it comes to schedule. And maybe even a little bit more of a conflict, because you look at some campuses that are heavily Title I with high needs, and their enrichment hall, there might be 12 people, and our enrichment hall has 3.5. So granted, we don't have as many pull-out, but it gets to the point that they go down a hallway and each teacher can pull 4 kids. Ours go down a hallway, they still have to pull kids, but then they only pull 2. So we still have to cover as many probably classes, if you will, they're just smaller. So it
Okay.
does make it harder.
And that's what, with noticing that throughout the district, we have there's such a discrepancy in some of our smaller schools to larger schools, where we have some schools like ours that, technically with the stats that we're going over, there were 399 students.
Yeah.
When you have some elementary schools that are closer to 1,000, where our 5th grade and 4th grade, we had 4 4th grade teachers this year, 3 5th grade teachers, where on some campuses you have 8 or 9.
Yep, you can.
So do you see, while there are some challenges with a smaller school, do you see some positives
Oh, yeah, yeah.
as far as and then meaning that would be a little bit, do you think that it's more efficient because we are small?
Yes, I do. Ultimately, I think it's better. There are pieces of it that make it harder, but ultimately, yes, probably kind of twofold. You think of smaller campuses that the kids know the teachers better, so they know the faces in the hall. It's not a new face every day, as well as the teachers know the kids. You think of when they go off to specials. We have like 40 kids in the gym. Well, some campuses have like 80 or 90 in the gym. So I'm also thinking about cardiovascular movement, and they're not going to get as much movement and exercise, and it's also a safety factor with that many kids
I was
running in the
actually
gym.
gonna bring that
So
up.
there's those pieces that make it positive that you're a little bit smaller. I also have to say, when there is, typically in the last couple of years, when there's been something new we wanted to try, a new initiative, trying to get buy-in and move a ship that only has 20 classroom teachers, in essence, is probably easier than trying to move a ship that has 30 classrooms. Because you're likely to get, there's a better chance, I think, to
There are
move a
less people
small.
that are stuck in their ways.
Maybe.
If you get 2/3 of 20 moving in one direction, then
Yeah.
to jump to a different, and something that we talked about a little bit earlier, we talked about lunch and specials and placement like that. I know that in our past, we have, our specials have been slightly in different areas. And so but we haven't had a whole lot of movement. So when you're thinking about, I guess, placement of specials, is that because certain students have certain age levels have things that they can all do? Is that because of their abilities, or more to fit into the
Okay.
actual schedule?
Okay, we tend to cluster the K through, or it's K and 1. We tend to keep K and 1 at the same part of the day, because the teaks and the games at that level are pretty much the same. When you get into 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, they're gonna have a different kind of game. So you also have to look at the turnaround time between classes to change out materials. So that's part of why we keep the main chunk clustered in the morning
Okay.
of 2, 3, 4, 5. In the afternoon, that gives specials the break in the middle to change things out. then they're ready for K&1 in the afternoon with a different set of games.
Okay,
So it's easier to tweak the kids in the morning because it's not a major change.
Right.
Between the two sections, it's a major change some days, so they have that break in between.
and then you said earlier about the one thing that you would hold fast on is kindergarten at the end of the day for specials.
Yeah.
Obviously, that has a connection to dismissal.
Yeah.
Is there anything else with the schedule that that you look at and you've seen in your experience that as far as having a successful dismissal and safe and that's necessary to bind into that schedule? I know that we start stacking and packing at 2:30 when our dismissal's 2:45. Is that something that's building wide?
Around 2:30, 2:35 it
Okay.
is. And I found that having kindergarten down there already set, they're already in that area of the building versus being the whole other side. All these grade levels are coming through the hallway to get to dismissal, cross traffic coming out the front doors, people going all the way down the hall to the bus. We don't need to lose the little ducks. So to have them already down there sheltered is also an increased safety precaution.
We talked about a lot of pull-out programs. You talked a little bit about how staff is involved in the development of the schedule. So could you go just a little bit more detail as far as staff involved? I know that in March you bring in team leaders. What if there's a substantial change over the summer? Maybe we have a big rush of students coming in, maybe students with specific needs. Is there ever a time that you would have to call people in and the master schedule would have to change? Or would that just be an adjustment with those students?
I wouldn't say that it could never happen.
Right.
I haven't had it happen, but yeah, there could be a time where you'd have an increased group, so you can't have them all clustered in one room, or class sizes aren't allowing it, we have to move people. I would assume that the schedule wouldn't have to change drastically,
Right.
but there could always be those kind of changes and tweaks at the beginning of the year.
And popping back to specials, I know that we have a certain amount, we have 4 specials, I guess, options, where you have, I guess, 2 PEs, art and music. If our population were to double, we still only have that specific 45 to 50 minutes for specials. How does that work with, I guess, do they have to abide by the same rules as far as class size?
Yes, there are some expectations with class size. So when your campus hits a certain number, you'll get like a halftime. So
Okay.
they'll give you like a halftime music teacher, a halftime
Okay.
art teacher, another coach. There'll be things of that nature to ensure that whichever grade levels, if it's only certain grade levels, that they have that extra support, which can now begin to compound some campuses' schedules, because if for some reason your campus is growing
Right.
and your K&1 numbers are just jacked up, then you might get a halftime person that comes to you, but then your master schedule is dictated by when that person's on campus. Because you gotta utilize them for the grade level
Right.
you need them. So we're
It's
fortunate they
similar
don't have
to-
that.
To our half day for
Dyslexia.
Take Flight for dyslexia.
Yep.
And so, do you know in advance? I mean, obviously, a few months. Like, when would you know as far as when you're going to have that teacher? Because I know one of our dyslexia specialists, she changed campuses on her alternate campus, correct?
Mhm.
And so her time's going. Like, when do you find
Yep.
out things like that?
They give the teacher this is your job for next year. You're here and here.
Right.
So it did change last year. So then that came down to the 2 principals talking. So when we sat down and started with the schedule, everybody just picked lunch and recess and specials, did all that. And then when we started to work on class list, I talked with the instructional specialist and dyslexia teacher to feel out what's gonna work best, what do you need, and then when I talked to the principal, we kinda kept it the way it's always been. She comes in the afternoon.
I know that we have our daily planning, during our specials time. Does teacher planning, PH, extended planning, is that something that factors into the development of the schedule, or is that something that obviously the teacher planning with our daily, that's worked in?
I think it's just always, it's what you have to do. I mean, teachers have always for years, it's law, required to get, I think it's supposed to be like an average of 45 minutes a day over so long. I don't know exactly what it is, because I know we're fully covered at our 50 or
Right.
55 minutes,
Yeah.
but that's how the law was written in regards to what you're entitled to. That and the 30 minutes duty-free lunch, written in the law that has to happen for teachers. Cannot really, your planning can include a meeting,
Mhm.
but it means a break from the kids to work on what we need to work on, and then your duty-free lunch. So I think those have just always been there, that they don't really impact the master schedule. As long as the kids are off and going to specials,
Mhm.
that ensures there's time for the teachers to do some things that they need to do.
And this is one of those, sort of, in a perfect world, everybody would get every single thing that they need or want. Can every need be met for every single grade level?
Nah.
Okay.
And you have to look at it from that global perspective, that you do
Right.
everything you can. So just like your schedule's not perfect this year.
Right.
We'll get it perfect next year. The schedule that you have in fourth grade, I know there's that one extra change you wanted that didn't happen. But I think overall, you do your best to make everyone happy. It's for the students' benefit, it's for the teachers' benefit. So you do what you can, but it's never 100%.
Okay. And just to end, and yes, we made it to time.
Talk that long.
Personally, what are your biggest challenges when creating a master schedule?
We seem to get all the kids in. I think the biggest challenge is just making sure you check with all entities. You have to make sure you're talking to all the enrichment team and the teachers. It's just a lot of checks and balances, just making sure they all happen. I'm fortunate, again, in regards to the enrichment team has been together a couple years. So they're a well-oiled machine, so that makes it a little bit easier, because that's a huge piece to it.
And I know I said that was the last one, but
Okay.
last one. Once you have a successful master schedule that works, obviously it's not something that we just assume going year to year is going to continue to work. Is that something that you reflect on at the end of the year to see, okay, with our certain population, kids moving to certain grade levels, is that something that you guys look at?
There are patterns that you can see over the years, but certainly the dyslexia teachers who are always pulling those kids out, they're gonna have the same kids the next year, because it's a 2 or 3 year program.
Right.
So they know their kids, they know when they're gonna need to see them. When it comes to ESL, Sally knows which little friends, she's had them for a year, and she's just like, that kid has got to be in the morning. Those conversations start to occur because they've experienced the kids.
Right.
And then you look at GT, Hall starts to realize those two may not really be a good match. And so some of those changes are made, but there are some commonalities from year to year, but we do learn the group of kids to make sure we're making changes and tweaking and making it better.
And so, I mean, just from everything that you said, like, we want the schedule to work, but in the end, it's really about doing what's best for the students as a whole, trying to make sure instructionally they're there, but at the same time, emotionally, they're taken care of.
And also supporting the teachers. We don't want to be coming in 3 different times on your reading block. That's not going to be effective for you or the kids. We also want to make sure they're being pulled and in the right environment so that they have their needs met. If they need to have something on a different level, we need to provide that and decrease some of that stress during the day before we push them back in there. So it's you and the kids, keeping everybody as comfortable as possible.
Okay, that does it. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.